welcome to Towards a Kinder Public and a special civic how-to episode. This episode is available both as a video with slides and visuals and via our regular podcast audio. As always, a full transcript is available. We are really fortunate to have Pamela Tate, a very accomplished climate activist, here to walk us step by step through regenerative agriculture recommendations for one of the most important pieces of legislation on climate issues for the next 10 years, which is the 2023 Farm Bill. Pamela is the chair of campaigns for the Chicago Metro chapter of the Climate Reality Project and a member of the board of directors of American Forests, where she serves as chair of the External Affairs Committee, as well as many other leadership roles in organizations serving climate, education, and disability missions. Over the past few episodes of Towards a Kinder Public, we have talked about agriculture and why this is an extremely important moment to make adjustments to our legislation and spending and support farmers who are using organic, regenerative, and community-conscious methods. The U.S. Farm Bill comes up for renewal about every 5 to 7 years, and this one will have significant impact on our ability to provide access to healthy food and demonstrate resilience through changing weather patterns that might ruin the farming season for those who are unprepared to adapt methods and crops to current conditions. Simply put, we can't eat federal crop insurance, which is what large conventional farms receive when a crop is totally ruined. We need the crops themselves. This is the moment where agricultural methods must shift. And this is true all over the world, even if the weather pattern in an area seems to be benefiting the growing season in that location. So in this episode, after we've looked at the regenerative agriculture recommendations, Pamela will take us step by step through the method that she uses to reach out to her congressperson and request a meeting to share information. We're going to use the Farm Bill as an example, but of course, these steps can be used on any issue that is important to you. Pamela shares every step in detail, so you can feel very confident that you know what to expect. And as Pamela says during our interview, the agricultural recommendations she will be walking us through do not cost huge amounts of money, and they are not political. They are about removing conflicts in current legislation and relying on common sense so that we can use our budget better and all eat food that is healthy and meets our nutritional needs. Now we'll jump right into the slideshow with Pamela. This is suitable for adults and kids. I hope you find it informative and encouraging. Pamela Tate, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to discussing the civic how-to information with you.
It's great to be here, and I appreciate the invitation, because we really want to get people working on advocating for the Farm Bill. So I'll just begin by, I will go over a few of the pieces of information about regenerative agriculture and agroforestry, just so that we're all on the same page. But I think the thing that I want to emphasize the most is that the Farm Bill, to a lot of us, might seem not very relevant. It's just relevant to farmers. But the truth is, it is literally a program that impacts more Americans than any other government program. And it's not just about farmers and ranchers. It's about our food, our water, the air we breathe. It's about the wildlife. It's really about also the future of the planet. And so this is an enormous opportunity for us, and we don't want to miss it. Then, just briefly, I'm going to cover the soil depletion and its relationship to climate change very quickly, how these practices that we're talking about can help, what they actually are, and then what can we change using the Farm Bill, and how do we advocate conservation in the Farm Bill? What are the ways that we go about that? Mm-hmm. Now, I just want you to see this picture, because I don't know about you, but this is very disturbing to me, because the dark blue areas and the really cobalt blue areas are the areas worst affected by soil erosion. And that's what we need to know going in, is that global soil health is definitely in decline. Degradation of farmland soil, it causes crops to be less productive. And because there's more global warming and more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that's even makes crops more unproductive.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing that we've got to do is reverse these practices that are degrading our soils. And one thing I wanted to mention, you may or may not know, is that about 3.2 billion people across the planet are suffering from degraded soils. That is almost half of the world's population.
Mm.
So everybody knows it, but we're not necessarily taking steps fast enough to do something about it.
Well, this is interesting. Could I actually ask a question about that point? I think it's still a very common misconception that changing our agricultural systems will cause less nutrition rather than better and improved access to nutrition, because there's an impression that industrial farming actually increases the access to healthy food. Is that true?
No, that is a misconception. The conventional agricultural methods produce more food, but the food that they produce is less nutritious.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you add chemical fertilizers or any other chemical inputs, including pesticides, in the soil, you kill a lot of the natural microorganisms that are in the soil, and you end up having nutritional problems with what you're growing.
Mm-hmm.
And one example that I read in the research, I've read many research reports, but one of them was what said that we would have to eat 8 oranges today to get the same nutritional value as our grandparents did eating 1.
Mm-hmm.
Because of how they're grown. So it's like there's more of them, but we're still not getting what we need.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's that misconception is a huge problem.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention the International Governmental Committee on Policy Change. You know, they are pointing out that on the climate side, we're on nutrition, but on the climate side of the house, agriculture and the food system are key to global climate change. How we do agriculture could make an enormous difference in what we are able to pull down out of the atmosphere in the way of CO2. So I just want to briefly review with you the principles of regenerative agriculture. And these are the ones that I think you've covered before, so I won't do as much in detail on them. But a really important one that was new to me is make sure that you have the least disturbance of the soil that you can. And remember, there's a big difference between soil and dirt, because once all the nutrients are out of the soil, they just become dry dirt. And that's why you have dust storms, and we had the Dust Bowl in the 30s, because there wasn't anything left in the soil to hold it together. So the thing that's exciting, I think, is that you don't disturb the soil, you don't till the land and expose the soil. You just drop seeds in the ground, and you don't use chemical fertilizers and pesticides. You also don't let the fields be barren in the winter. You use little cover crops that will cover the ground all winter long. So because then you're protecting the soil by doing that. In other words, keep it in the ground and cover it up. It's pretty clear. And then you also should, of course, do composting and make sure that the organic matter that you're composting with goes back to enrich the soil. Then, we really believe strongly that if you're going to produce animals, and there's a lot of controversy about animals, but if you're going to grow and breed animals, then you've got to stop putting them in these controlled animal feeding operations and put them into grazing areas and forested areas, because if their waste is in that kind of an area, it just enriches the soil. Whereas when it's in a dry feedlot with nowhere to go, it just ends up causing methane emissions.
Mm-hmm. It's a pollutant.
Yeah, it's a huge pollutant, but it doesn't have to be if it's done as a part of a regenerative integrated farm.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I just would say building biodiversity in generally is really good for the soil, meaning maybe incorporate perennials, perennial grasses,
Mm-hmm.
trees, shrubs. What they do is keep the roots in the ground, and that's where you want them, because the more roots you have in the ground, the more water control you have, and the less prone the farm is to flooding. And just keep in mind the way that these crops vary based on where you live. Like you wouldn't plant the same row crops or the same kind of trees if you're in Arizona versus if you're in the state of Illinois. But there are people that can help you with that. So those are the things that I think will make a real difference. And this is just a picture of each of them. That's what a no-tilling looks like on the left. See all that grass and stuff in the middle?
Mm-hmm.
Cover crop. And whereas in the winter to the right, that's what things look like.
So just to describe this for people who may not have access to the visuals at this moment, on the left side of the screen, we're looking at a picture where we have brown, dry-looking grass strips interspersed with green, vibrant-looking crop strips, where the brown cover crop, which is finished its life cycle, is now protecting and covering the soil. And on the right side, we have a picture of a till agricultural setup where the entire soil surface is completely exposed to the sun, deeply grooved, and available to be blown away by the wind.
Right. This is just no need to probably explain this one. I've already talked about the biological and crop diversity part, but I just thought that was a great picture of a bee on a flower. What you want to do is you want to promote pollinators, and by doing diverse plantings, you increase your biological and crop diversity. Now there's another picture here. You could explain that if you'd like, but it's what a cover crop looks like in the off season. In other words, when we're not in the growing season. And on the left, you've got this very brown, bare soil, and it's easily blown away. We lose tons of topsoil per acre every year. Mm-hmm. On the right, I don't know what it is. I don't know what that crop is, but it's the same kind of land, but it's covered like this all winter.
And like you mentioned, there are people that can help you determine what the appropriate cover crop is too, for what you're trying to achieve. And
what's available where you live.
Exactly.
What's native.
Mm-hmm.
This might be one of the last two comparisons. If you cause your animals to graze or be in a very confined area, you will see land barren like this. If, on the other hand, you do planned grazing, where you literally move them from paddock to paddock over the growing season, and they are grazing in different areas, you allow time for the soil to regenerate and for it to use their waste in an effective way. So it's very important to graze one section at a time, one part of the pasture at a time, and then let the remainder of the pasture rest. I remember hearing one farmer say that to me. I just let it rest. And which is a nice concept, we all need rest, right?
That's right.
So then this is really important. On the left side, you see a plane dropping huge amounts of pesticides. And on the right, you see no chemicals, a greener area that has lots of grass and lots of trees and woods behind. It's just a whole lot more healthy for not only the animals, but us.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want the pesticides in our food, and many of them do end up in our food. So that would be another thing. And that's one of the reasons that farmers are more profitable when they use regenerative approaches. It's because they're not paying for all the fertilizers and the pesticides. So they may produce fewer crops because they're diversifying them, but they're more profitable. That's often another misconception, that regenerative farming doesn't make money. It actually does. Mm-hmm. And a lot of farmers will tell us that. And then just briefly here, we also wrote a paper, and when we were talking to congressmen, we discussed with them the practices of agroforestry. And that's not talked about as much. For some reason, I really don't know why, it hasn't gotten the attention that farming itself has gotten. And because what you can do if you plant trees in various ways, which I'll just mention briefly, if you do that, you can stabilize your soil and you can pull down more carbon. So you can also increase nutritional value in the food. Tree roots are wonderful stabilizers and kind of safeguards against flooding and drought. So the picture here is that we're seeing is animals grazing under trees. So the idea is to farm with trees, not to cut the trees down so that you can farm.
This is actually the more original farming system for this continent. And it's been, like you said, it's been removed from our awareness. David Gisson, in his recent book, The Architecture of Disability, discusses how the representation and imagery around agriculture has favored the European method of clearing the land, whereas we see in some naturalist paintings and documentation that early on agroforestry was absolutely the way that indigenous people maximized the amount of food that they were getting out of the land, but in a healthy, respectful way.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I guess I wasn't as aware of the benefits of agroforestry until we started doing this research, but now I really see how the tree root systems improve the aggregation of the soil and organic matter. They have a way of pulling it in and retaining it. And when we've seen pictures of farmlands, one next to the other, where one is totally flooded and the other isn't, it's always when the one that's in good shape is always one with diversified crops and trees. So we've got a lot of proof that this works. We just need to get the word out. I'm showing some pictures that people may or may not be able to see, just of what we mean when we say agroforestry. We might mean something like this: alley cropping. That is where you plant a single or multiple rows of trees in parallel to the crops. You break up every so often, you put in a row of trees. Then there's windbreaks. This is where the trees are. I have big fields on the screen, and then the trees are in a row, and they're called also shelter belts. They're the planting of trees as barriers to protect a specific area downwind, and they help reduce wind erosion. So those are also really important. And then there's the third kind of is these riparian buffers, and what they are is you plant those at the edge of bodies of water, and what that does is it buffers the water bodies from potential negative impacts of cropland or pasture, because it reduces soil erosion by having them at the edge instead of having them just wash into the rivers and end up in dead zones in the ocean. So that is another method that can be followed based on where you live. And then we've already looked at this what's called silvopasture, which is grazing your animals in the forest. That's a much more attractive picture than a controlled animal feeding operation. Do we just see a bunch of cattle just grazing in the middle of a bunch of trees?
Right.
Yeah.
Those must be healthier, happier animals too.
They are. And then the last one, just quick, is forest farming. And that's where you can cultivate shade tolerant specialty crops. That means like medicinal herbs, like mushrooms, things like that. It can help protect forests and keep from causing flooding, and helps with drought as well. So these are all ways to add more value to your land, but also help the climate. Because the more of these things you have, the more CO2 is going to be sequestered. Okay, so now that we've just done our little, kind of 101 on regenerative agriculture and agroforestry, I want to focus on the Farm Bill itself. Because, as I said before, it's the most important bill in that it affects every person in the country. And it's coming up this year. Every 5 or 6 years, it comes up for reauthorization. And one of the reasons that it is so critical is that it has a conservation title in it. There are 8 titles, and the conservation title is absolutely central to moving to regenerative practices. And that's what got me interested in it, in fact, a couple of years back. So I want to share with you in a moment the policy recommendations that we have made for regenerative agriculture and agroforestry. Then we'll do a little bit of information and resources at the end. But look at the size of it. The U.S. Farm Bill is $1.3 trillion.
Wow.
I mean, it's huge. One of the titles goes for nutrition, what used to be called food stamps, but is now called the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, SNAP. But after you take that out, that 84% out, then what you have left is $79.7 billion in the crop insurance title. We're going to look at that quickly. You've got $59.2 billion in this all-important title, conservation. And you've got $56.1 billion in commodity subsidies. So, those are the 3 that we focused on. And I also want everybody to remember when they talk to their legislator that this year, this is unusual, but this year, the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed a year ago, it provides an additional $10 billion for climate smart agricultural practices. Now, it isn't in the Farm Bill, but it's almost like an add-on to the Farm Bill. We want to make sure that Congress does not take away that $10 billion and put it into something else. We want to make sure we save that $10 billion for climate smart practices, because those are exactly the practices we've been talking about. So I'm just going to review for you the recommendations that we zeroed in on. Now, there are more. There are many more that would improve it, but I just felt that it was important for us to drill down to the big 6 that we thought could make the most difference. And the first one is to upgrade and enhance programs, incentives, and funding that will help scale up RA practices, regenerative ag practices. And further, that would make reducing greenhouse gas emissions a priority for the spending. Because right now it's not listed as a priority in the spending. To me, that is really critical.
Right.
And there are lots of specifics under that I could talk to you about. Right now, though, for example, between 39 and 69% of the applications for moving to a conservation approach are denied due to lack of funding.
Wow.
So even though all these farmers want to do this, many want to do this, it's just not easy to get anything approved. There's just not enough money there. So we could really use that additional $10 billion from the IRA. The other thing is that often the conservation title passes as part of the law, but then it's subject to the annual appropriations process. So it's an easy area to cut. It has in the past. So we are trying to make sure that it becomes a mandatory program that is not subject to annual appropriations reductions. To me, that's a critical one.
Yes.
Then we have one recommendation related to the crop insurance title. And why are we focused on crop insurance, you might wonder? But what I want to share with you, which I was surprised to learn, is that if you decide as a conservation minded person that you want to transition your farm to the approaches I'm talking about, it will take 2 to 3 years to make that transition. And with trees, will take a few more because they have to grow. Well, if you go that way, then you lose your crop insurance discount, because the crop insurance premium discounts are geared to large commodity crops, conventional agriculture. It's all related to what the yield is per acre rather than what the soil is doing. And so essentially you kind of have to choose between conservation and insurance. I mean, that's what it feels like to me. And that's a huge disincentive for farmers. What they need is the opposite. They need an incentive to move into conservation. So just to be clear, the conservation title, if you go into that part and you want to get funded from one of the many programs there, you have to diversify your crops. You have to include a non-commodity cover crop, or, you would lose your support through the conservation title program. So this is a serious problem, and I don't think it's talked about enough. You could, for example, reward farmers who use good soil health with a higher premium subsidy, a higher subsidy amount, or an adjusted insurance premium rate. There are a number of ways that legislators could make this change, and we do recommend some of them in our document. So the third thing that we are talking about with every congressman's staff that we can reach is we've got to do something about the resources that are given to the Natural Resources Conservation Service. I talked with several of them myself, with agents, because I don't own a farm. I don't know about this. So I tried to get to know them. And to a person, they said, we don't have the staff or the technical expertise to help farmers implement regenerative practices. We know about them, but unless a farmer comes to us and specifically says that they need this help, we don't really go out there because we don't have the manpower to do it. And they told us that they thought that they needed training. They needed, new curriculum. And so in our policies, we have suggested things like a certification curriculum for all technical service providers in the NRCS. This could be done, I think, without a huge amount of expense. I mean, it would cost, but it's doable. And then we suggest ways for farmers themselves to go through soil health education and training. And that would raise awareness and get this to happen more quickly. So we've got just 3 others. We noticed that 2%, less than 2% of public funds are going to support research in this area. It seems so strange to me because the practices have been proven to be more profitable and better for nutrition and for animals and for pollinators and for carbon sequestration. And yet 2%, less than 2% of the money for research goes into regenerative ag. And all the research that is funded is for promotion of inputs like chemicals into farming. A lot of the research at universities is funded by the agrochemical industry. And so, of course, they have an interest in these areas and they have the money. So we need our public dollars to be going into research in the conservation area. And then this 5th recommendation is a little less obvious. So I'm going to spend just a bit of time on it. We're suggesting that the Farm Bill incentivize the investment in infrastructure that would support a diverse food system. And to give you an idea of why this is needed, farmers told us they need regional services, the kind of subsidies that are currently only going to the largest industrial farms. For example, seed cleaning facilities, storage for crops, places to have crops inspected, all of the USDA programs for looking at what farmers are producing. Right now, they are down to, I think, let me see if I have the number. Yeah, there's only 850 of them now across the whole country, whereas in the late 60s, there were 10,000 of them. So it makes it really difficult for a small or regional farmer to even get an appointment, to even get to them. So this really puts them at a disadvantage. So what we're trying to do is to say, let's use some of the dollars, maybe from the IRA, to introduce some mobile units, some regional services, and the kinds of subsidies that currently are going to only the largest conventional farming facilities. And let's incentivize doing it the way we're suggesting, and maybe even remove some of the subsidies from controlled animal feeding operations. Because I read this amount, and at first I thought it couldn't be true, but it is. If you subsidize a controlled animal feeding operation, and then you have to, of course, then add a digester to digest the methane. And those digesters are $4 million each.
Wow.
And so why is the government purchasing methane digesters, which we wouldn't need if we weren't farming that way? I don't know about you, but that really...
Yes, no, that actually was a big topic in one of our recent podcast episodes with a New York organic farmer who was talking about the unreliability of that system, the environmental damage, the loss of the natural fertilizer for pasture, and then the use of the methane product to feed into natural gas pipelines.
Right. Thank you for saying that, because I was going to mention that at the end. Yes, it's just used to produce more fossil fuel energy.
Yeah.
So I just don't understand why we would need to subsidize these controlled animal feeding operations and then subsidize the purchase of methane digesters. If you just think, if you took that $4 million for each one of them and you instead put it into regional and local and mobile services, what a difference it could make. So the last one is on our agroforestry topic that I brought up earlier. We've come to believe from all the research that we need to do the same thing here. We need to expand the incentives and the funding to implement these practices. We've got to help farmers understand that you don't cut down trees to do farming. You farm with your trees and you manage them, and they will help your soil. We're losing 5.4 tons of topsoil per acre per year right now. That's a lot. That's a lot of topsoil. And we don't want another dust bowl, and that's where we're headed. So we need to stop that from happening. I'm not going to go through the agroforestry policy requests in any detail, because you've already gone through what the agroforestry practices are. But remember that right now there's very few incentives and there's very little funding. So obviously those things need to be changed. And then we need to do the same thing here that what we were arguing for in the regenerative agriculture area. We need to fund education, information dissemination, research. We need to fund the technical assistance providers. We put in our little slide here the titles we're talking about: Title 5, Title 11. Title 11 is crop insurance title. So this has the same issue as regenerative agriculture in general. It isn't allowing farmers to make good choices. So that is the second one. And then we also go really in depth about number 3, which is to really expand protections for existing natural forests, and not just on public land, but on private land as well. Hoping that we can get some incentives to build public-private partnerships, or get private landowners to conserve these forests, because we need them for sequestration of carbon, but also for wildlife protection of habitat. So we're hoping that the Farm Bill could expand these protections, and in doing so, increase the health of the soil. So the research in every single area is just needed right now, and training and technical assistance. I know that's always the solution talked about, but the truth is, it's the best one. Everybody needs it. So last, we looked at the forestry Title 8, And I thought that this was really an important statistic to share with you, that the U.S. National Greenhouse Gas Inventory, which was issued by the EPA in April of last year, it states that U.S. forests sequestered an offset of approximately 13% of the gross greenhouse gas emissions from the U.S. And if we planted many additional trees and forests, we could make a huge difference in pulling down more carbon from the atmosphere. And we're talking about including money for native plant surveys, native seed banks, native plant nurseries, everything that will build the supply chain for trees. Seed banks, we're short of seeds right now, and nurseries are trying to get more of them. I am on the board of directors of American Forests, so I know quite a bit about the seed bank issue. And if there were more federal funding to support this, it would make a huge difference to people in terms of how likely they'd be to make the change. We, having seen all this, said to ourselves, well, the big agricultural and chemical interests are lobbying, so we better do the same thing,
Right.
And you just can't sit by and go, oh, how terrible this all is. You have to decide that you're going to have a voice. So one of the first things that you can do is to learn who represents you. If you don't know, your congressperson and your senator. And I've put in a link here to how you find them.
Mm-hmm.
You just click on the link, and you probably have a way of sharing that link.
We will definitely share all of this
good.
as well as those links. Yes.
If you click on the link and put in your address, boom, up will come the contact information for your senator and representative. There's one link for the House, one link for the Senate, and it'll ask you to complete a contact form. You click on the contact, you say, I want to meet with so-and-so about, and then it gives you a bunch of choices, and you say environment, or if it gives you one on agriculture, click that, and then say that you will call shortly. First do the form, then you call.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have found is that if you are a constituent, you live in the area covered by the congressman or the senator, they will have somebody meet with you. It'll be a legislative aide, and many times they have legislative aides that are specialists on agriculture or on the Farm Bill itself. So you may or may not get a knowledgeable person. Sometimes I've talked to people that are literally, this is their first Farm Bill. They know nothing about it. And others came from farms. They're quite well educated in the area. But regardless, it's important to know your legislators' committee assignments. All you have to do is just go to their website. You can get a real feel for them just by looking at the committees they're on, their pet projects, what their record of voting is. I just do that so I have it in my back pocket. I don't ever bring it up usually. And, there are like 100+ people in the Agriculture Committee. And that's the committee that produces the draft of the bill that will be voted on this fall. If you hit somebody that's on the Ag Committee that lives in your area, that's even better. So ask for a meeting. Just ask for a meeting. And most of the time we do the meetings on Zoom, but if you're near enough, if you're flexible, you can go and actually meet with a person in person. That's always the best. So here's what our whole Climate Reality Project wants every person to do, regardless of where you live. Remember that this is only reauthorized every 5 to 7 years. The reason we put 7 is that sometimes it's a 5-year authorization and it runs out September 30th of this year. But often what happens is they can't agree on the provisions. So they do a temporary extension to allow them to continue working on the bill. And I've been told that this year there will be another temporary extension. I don't know until when, but I know that it will not be voted on before September 30th, which gives us the month of September to contact our legislators. So this is the time to weigh in on the Farm Bill. If you can, contact the agricultural committee members, especially if they're from your state. If they aren't on the agricultural committee, still call them and have meetings so you can educate them, because they do have to vote on this ultimately. And what I've been told by several of their aides is that more than, or no, is it more than or almost 50% of the legislators have never voted on a farm bill before. And so, we've got a lot of educating to do here. And then I would suggest that you use these talking points. And the talking points will be in the resources section, but use them because they will help you through the phone call. I'm just repeating what I said in the beginning, which is that the Farm Bill impacts more American lives than any other government program. So if there was ever going to be a time to try to fight for the environment, this is the time. We won't have any other big bills like this, I don't think, in quite a while. We've already passed the IRA, we passed the Infrastructure Act. After the Farm Bill, we're not going to have a lot of chances to change policy for a while in an area that we care a lot about. So I want to emphasize this historic opportunity. That's what this is. Regenerative agriculture needs to be put at the forefront. It needs the kind of coverage that you're trying to give it. And we need to build the political will that will change our food system, because our agriculture system is our food system. A lot of people think, oh, farms, what's that got to do with me?
Everyone eats.
Everyone eats, right. And then I've put the names of all of us on the team. There are others, but the four of us who did the most work on the policy papers. Mm-hmm. So that if people wanted to be in contact with any of us, we'd be happy to help you. And we've even been offering lately to sit in on meetings that you set up with your legislators, if we can do it, because we've got 30 chapters of the Climate Reality Project working on making legislative contacts right now. And that's, maybe 30 states are covered, but not all states. And so the more people that we can, incentivize to actually talk to their legislators, especially in September, and I'd say even October, mm-hmm. that the more we can do that, the more chance we have to have an influence on them. Because I know they do listen. We send them the policy recommendations before the meeting, and then we go over them at a high level. And they usually give you 30 minutes. That's all you get. Once in a while, it might run over, but to 40 minutes. But usually this is what their day is like. They're 30, 30, 30, 30 all day long. So you really have to have your ideas pretty clearly laid out so that you can get your recommendations in before your time is up. It's so easy to run out of time. So I don't know if we have questions that I can answer, but I would be happy to do that if people would like further information.
That's really helpful. Thank you for sharing that. I just want to clarify one point. When you were saying that you fill out the contact form asking for a meeting, they're going to email you back, and then the person that contacts you is the recipient of the document that you send in advance of your meeting. Is that right?
Usually.
Okay.
Although, well, thank you. It's an important piece that I didn't mention. Usually there's somebody in the office who's just monitoring incoming contact forms. And that's often not the legislative aide to the congressperson. It's like a general administrative support person. Mm-hmm. So they funnel the contact forms to the various people. So what I do is I write in to the congressional representative, because that person, if I can get their email. And what we've been doing? We've been on this quest to get a spreadsheet with every legislative aide to every congressperson in the country. They don't post them on the website, and they don't post their emails. So we're getting close. We've been working on it for 8 months, but we're about there. I think we may have them all by now. And that is wonderful because it tells you the legislative aid, the agricultural aid, if there is one, so you can then communicate directly with them. And that really helps.
That's great. So you can send those documents to those emails.
Yeah.
And one thing that I learned, well, I didn't learn just one thing from you, but I've learned many things from you. But one important thing that I found about creating these meetings is that the Climate Reality Project has an interesting approach in contacting a representative's office and mentioning the group affiliation and saying that, you represent however many states or however many chapters of this organization. So that helps them feel motivated to meet with you, because although you may or may not be a direct constituent, you are representing a larger group of people in this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. And I let me just say, though, it is not always the case that they will meet with you if you're not a constituent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say I've used that argument. I represent 30 chapters of the Regenerative Agriculture Coalition, and this is across the country. And I, said that kind of thing in all my letters that I send, on my emails. Mm-hmm. And I would say I get responses that are in the affirmative about 50% of the time. And then 50% of the time, they don't write back. So usually after 3 weeks, I write them again. And I send a copy of the documents again. And I say, perhaps this got lost in your email. I'm still interested in meeting with you, since I know that the voting on this won't occur until later in the year. And we represent hundreds of people, thousands of people who have an interest in the Farm Bill. Could you please consider 30 minutes with me? And I get some responses to that one. Sometimes people will just say, oh, yeah, it got lost, or, I did see it, but I was busy, Mm-hmm. But it's harder for them to turn you down if you write them a second time. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you, if you're a constituent, they will get back to you. So if you don't want to go roaming around the country talking to congressmen from other places, start with your own, because they're the most, close to you. They know your vote matters. We have never had a turn down from a congressman staff who is in our district. And other members of the Regenerative Ag Coalition say the same thing. They always get those meetings. And what I don't know is, how many states are still uncovered. We're only going to call the legislators, the Chicago chapter and the Denver chapter that are leading this coalition. We're only going to call the states that nobody is representing right now. Other than that, we're saying to people, call your own legislators. Mm-hmm. Because, for example, we here in Illinois, we've got 17 representatives on the Ag Committee just from Illinois.
Yeah.
So it's quite a job to get to them all. And you may, if you're from a big state, a populous state, you would have a lot of phone calls to make just sticking with your own area. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that your recommendation is right on target.
I've been learning a lot, and I'm really grateful for all of the information and encouragement that you're sharing. I think that it's so important to know that you do have a voice, and to know what to do to use your voice, something we don't talk enough about. So I really appreciate you sharing this information so generously.
Oh, I'm really enjoying the opportunity to talk to people. I guess I just want to say one more time, don't be uptight about calling a legislator if you've never done it before. They're just another person who is working for the congressman, and they're eager to learn. And I've never had a bad conversation, even if they don't agree with you. And I've had some of those. don't think that, oh, well, I'm not used to working on policy. I can't talk to my legislator. You can. They're just people. And a lot of them don't have the information that you're ready to share.
So you're helping.
Yeah, you're helping them. That's how I think of it.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm a good information source.
That's right. And a nice person to talk to.
Yeah, well, I try to be. I try to be somebody they want to talk to. Yeah. We've got to somehow find a way to get all the members of the House that are Democratic to vote for conservation, growth, and climate smart stuff. And we've got to find a way to sway 5 to 10 Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of it as a whole, it sounds overwhelming. But when you think of it in terms of numbers of people, it's not that many.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been telling myself that in order to remain motivated.
Right. We only need 5 to 10.
Yep. That's all you need.
Mm-hmm.
And of course we don't have the lobbying strength of the agrochemical industry, but we still haven't given up. I mean, that's the most important thing, is just not to throw up your hands. And some of the recommendations just don't seem political to me at all. They just seem like common sense, good ideas.
I agree.
Like not having a conflict between crop insurance, getting crop insurance discounts, and doing conservation. Why should there be a conflict? That's the sort of thing that I'm feeling like we need to talk about. Something that isn't as it's not like we're saying we need billions of new dollars for everything that we want. So that's why I'm trying to think of the recommendations that are substantive and obvious, but not extremely costly. And I always talk about the profitability of these farms, because, you can't argue with a farmer who's got a profitable farm and say you're doing something wrong. If you got a profitable farm that isn't hurting the environment and the food is better,
yeah,
what more can what else can you ask for?
Right.
So I've seen farmers who are quite open to these discussions. It's the legislators that get stuck in a corner, in my corner or your corner. We know from the research that the more fertilizers farmers use, and they're very expensive, and the more fertilizers they use, the worse the soil gets and the more they have to use.
Yeah.
So they have this escalating cost, and then the fertilizer runs off and into streams and rivers and into the ocean, etc. So they not only pay more, but they lose huge amounts of it into streams and rivers.
Yep.
So it's pretty hard to lobby like this with such huge interests on the other side. But I don't know. I do feel like this message is starting to get through.
I think so. Thank you so much. You're so accomplished and you do so much. And I'm soaking it up and learning so much that I just had no idea about. So,
well, you know what? 4 years ago, I didn't either, because my career was in the world of higher education. Mm-hmm. And I, spent my life as CEO of a nonprofit that worked on workforce development and adult learning and careers and so on. And I didn't put my full time into the climate movement until 4+ years ago. Mm-hmm. And now it is full time because there's so much to be done.
It's probably overtime now.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
True. Because, everything around us is falling apart. So you want to try to do what you can,
right.
But I'm really glad that this is where I'm going to devote the rest of my life to.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad too. So thank you.
Likewise.
Really glad. All right.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate your time today so much.
You too.